Hi, these are working notes exploring the idea of creating a holographic avatar for oneself and for the larger economy. I hope you appreciate the information. So, in terms of an overview, uh, we're going to talk about creating your own personal holographic entity, and that should be able to run on a cell phone. We're going to be using this hyperspace or 8x theory addressing scheme. We're essentially proposing that this is an internet of everything. And we're going to be talking mostly about the first three letters here, but you'll see, hopefully, you get a sense of how that fits in a larger context. And this is a system of systems design. It can run on a phone, multiple phones, on servers, serverless servers, any combination, which very similar to the concept of canisters on Dfinity. In fact, I'm not covering it here, but in terms of building this, canisters might be a good approach to it. So the objective, though, is to enable you to be a neuron running in the smart planet, being a foundation for the smart planet. So let's talk about the outline. There's going to be 5 sections. First, a quick primer on the geometric aspect of this stuff. It's good to have a sort of intuitive sense of it. It's pretty simple when you get the basic idea. And then we'll create a personal avatar. We'll show how that would work as like an app, and then we'll connect it to other avatars, and that should be clear how that happens. And then we'll talk about emergent avatars for enterprises, industries, the economy itself, and then we'll tie it to equity and ecological functions that are not being served very well by the current economy. And again, it's all boiling down to this string of characters in this order sorted here as of this time. So first, a quick primer on the geometry. And we're going to stick to 2D geometry, but then 3 and 4 dimensional and on up, we'll stick with 8 at most. Should just be rotations of these with additional degrees of freedom. But to start, these are the first 4 and really only ones we need tilings in 2 dimensions. You'll see there's 60, 90, 108, and 120 degrees, and these correspond to A, B, C, D, E, F. We're not showing I, but I is kind of think of I as your eyes, like your perspective. This is a perspectival system. There's no I can or authority in the system. It's just users and consensus building structures. But these are the basic structures. These are everything you need to know. These are all just reflections. So you take a line and you move another line off of it, and you get these angles. So we're going to kind of run through these to give you a better sense of it. There's the 120 degrees. That's a triangle. And we're keeping with symmetric shapes. We're going to potentially use the variance off of those symmetries for different probabilities or other functions. But we're starting sort of the state space with these basic symmetrical primitives. And so then we move to the square, and that's our B, our being. And so think of it as a lantern, the flame, the lantern containing that, and then C would be basically the same as B, but just slightly rotated, a different grid of squares. So C is also squares. And I like to think of this as process consciousness or kind of change, systems change, not just humans, but also our agents. And then we get to D. That is related to the pentagon. And although D is actually a concatenation of all the ones before it. So there's triangles, squares, pentagons in D as well. But D think of that as decisions. So think of it as a Vitruvian man standing there. And that can be an aggregated self. It could be a collective self, not just an individual self. But for our purposes now, it just could be your decisions, what you think at any given moment. And then finally, we get the good old hexagon, and that's going to be where we leave the infinite. We're going to be only concerned with E6, 7, and 8. We're not going to cover that here, but that's the consensus resolution where you bring together everyone's personal avatars into collective avatars. That's going to be done on the E space. So kind of break that out again. We've got these basic shapes that correspond to these lattices that are extensions of those. And really, we're just talking about one thing here. You, as a center point, have these angles off of you, and at each one of these points on a circle around you, or sphere around you, you have this data. And it's not so much the actual coordinates as the relative coordinates relative to the other positions. That's the key. And this can all, again, all be written out as a string of characters, like an address. And that can be a variable length. It doesn't matter. So that should be the primer. And then now we're going to get set up. We're going to sort of put this holographic entity onto your phone. So how do you start? Well, you start by entering something where you would be aware, like your email. What's your email, right? And this is not uncommon. Or you can put your phone number. What's your handle? How do we contact you? And in this case, I'll put my email at Gmail, and that's the A. And then from there, I need some sort of sense of identity. Who are you? And at first, it can be fast and loose, but as we go forward, if we're deploying this, it needs to be Sybil resistant. It needs to be a single identity for each individual. It could be obfuscated, but it needs to be known that it's an actual person at the basis, and then the agent needs to be attestatable to groups of people or an individual. But the key is this, but you need to only have one identity per person. But this could be a social security number, driver's license, all kinds of ways of validating this, WorldCoin, so on, etc. Right now, I'll just say my profile on LinkedIn. That would be my identity. So I put that in, I enter that on the phone app, and then the question comes up, what do you want? What's your objective function? What are you doing? What's important to you? What's your vision of what should be? And this is more fluid and flexible, more changeable than the first two. But I'm going to enter world peace. I want world, but you see it's a typo. This is where an app, of course, would correct it and say, hey, you want world peace? Make that suggestion. And you say, of course, that's what I want. We all want world peace, right? Then it gets into the decisions, like what do you think? And it would present the user with a series of curated questions, and you'll see as we go through this whole presentation some possible questions to get people started. But it's agnostic to topic. I think there's a convergence of topics, like that world peace, for example, would be a question that you could ask everybody. And you only have to ask it once, theoretically. People could just persist their answers. But this is, kind of what do you think about things? And we're going to assume everybody wants the world to be a better place, is a kind of convergence point. So there we've got our four infinite, and notice we're really only using like a line of text here. So it's really only A1, A1, B1, C1, D1, right? These are super simple versions of these. But they scale up through these. We can add more information. We're not limited to the amount of data we provide for each one of these. So you can add more identifiers. You can add more sort of points of contact. You can add more objective functions, sort of purposes and functions and functors and agents, and then more decisions. The more decisions you add, the more fully tiled your expression of yourself would be. And again, all these things tie together into a unified entity. This is the holon idea of a holographic representation of yourself. Okay, so there you go. You got your holon representing you, and now we're going to connect it to the meta us. We're assuming someone else, at least one other person, is doing this. So we'll be able to create a two-node or more holographic meta us. So starting with the basic units that we each created, we take those and we realize that not just is that triangle, even in 2D, it's in a plane where you can tile these 2D triangles together. So your triangle might be next to mine, it might be further away, and there's all sorts of factors that will determine the distance between different triangles. But these basically tile on. And by the way, they can be recursive. So a triangle can be composed of triangles ad infinitum. So you can kind of build up as much identity as you want for yourself, and then likewise with someone else, and you can connect it on a plane, any arbitrary plane you assert between you. And this, separate from that, is this B-plane of squares, this graph paper, think of it. And that extends to infinity, and we can tile any and all information about the entire world on this sort of graph paper. So everything would have an address relative to everything else. And then functions on that would be in this sort of orthogonal plane, the C. B and C in the Coxeter graph space are the same but slightly different. It's still a mystery to me why they broke it out, but it's convenient that they did because this seems to work pretty well. And then finally we're going to stop there actually. But D is you take your decisions and then you tile it in to this larger matrix space where we can be tiling all these functions. You can see how we're going to, as we go forward here, we're going to have all these different like civic avatars. Why not have an avatar for your local zip code, your local city, your local state, and ecology avatars, industry avatars, equity avatars, all these different avatars that you can basically decide to be a member of or be against those avatars for those purposes. But there's no limit. And again, you have these different lattices, these different graphs, which let you disambiguate your awareness and presence yourself differently amongst different entities with different functions, with relative to different decision objectives relative to the economy, the E8, which we'll come back to. But again, not really so much here. So here, I was going to do sort of the holographic economy. Then I thought, well, I sort of add this holographic industry. And then really, though, it gets down to sort of holographic enterprise. How does this methodology work? It's invariant across scale. It works across scale. The meta us can be 2 people or 1,000 or 8 billion. And as these systems that are kind of alluded to here, these smart systems emerge, we can expect there to be more robust surfaces for these to manifest on. But sort of building up, let's actually kind of drill down. These are the NAICS, the 20 industry sectors. Any company can be tiled into one of these, and you can think of each of these sectors as composed of decisions being made by individual people or groups of people together to make up the real estate business or the management of companies or education. But that's it. And any company product could be. There's about 3,800 at the end, like barbershops and semiconductor chips. They all tile into these 20. And if we focus in on one, just finance, we can sort of get a sense of that. Like every financial and insurance company would be inside, in a sense, or addressable via this 52 NAICS code, where you can sort of zoom in. And here's just the top 50 banks by assets, I think. It doesn't matter, but imagine each one having an address within that finance space. And then you can see I've kind of called out Wells Fargo. We're going to pick on them. But if you zoom into Wells Fargo, you see how this ABCDE would apply to the enterprise, where on the left we have a series of kind of bank functions, things that happen in a bank, like groups and such. And we can take those and we can sort of model them. We can tile them into this representation from these different perspectives, like who are the people doing the fixed income desk? What are they doing? What were their processes? What are their decisions? And how do those all fit together? So this is basically, you can run this on a graph database like a Neptune or Neo4j, but you could create, in a sense, a digital twin or mirror of the actual activities of the organization. And so you would end up with this ability to sort of zoom around and look at the ontology of the organization. This is some great work on the financial stability, like disruptions in banking. So you could illustratively you could sort of map how these disruptions are going to be impacting different functions in the bank. So, for example, the debt capital markets. You can see here. You can imagine these images are from SunGard back in the day. They're really cool. But you can see how these groups all sort of interrelate to each other. In the debt capital, you can sort of have that holographic enterprise, and that helps visibility for the accounting, finance, and audit. They would be able to see those functions much more clearly. And even if they can't see them, they would be able to sort of see that they can't see them a little more clearly. Quite often, auditors don't know the business. So having that ontology available helps them see what's not visible, in effect. And then this kind of brings you to the smart institution, where rather than just being a hierarchy of boss, CEO, then on down, you can have a holarchy where every node can talk to every other node and be weighted accordingly to expertise and not just authority. And so, kind of pulling that back out, that was Wells Fargo. You can extend these principles to a larger industry sector. So, illustratively, regulatory systems can be codified. You've heard of smart contracts and reg tech. That should allow all the different regulatory um, institutions to take their regulations and codify it in a manner that is easier, it's programmatic, easier to digest. This will help with that. And then add the functions to it too, not just the being of what it is, but an awareness of what needs to be done and whether it's been done, and actual operational functions can be put on it, depending on whether you're running an Oracle or AWS databases. Operational structures as well, and then as well as cyber. Cyber is a great one because a good portion of the risks of cyber risks are cross-institutional. They're common, and getting visibility on that would be an industry benefit. So those are just three ways of leveraging these tilings. And zooming back out to the industries, these are great, and bringing those on. And it's interesting that the Pentagon doesn't actually tile the surface as a uniform shape. You can't cover completely a flat plane with just pentagons without having other shapes. And so that's a good way of thinking about decisions and how different constellations of decisions tie together with different aspects of awareness and what is, and allow you to build things that are more complex. So there we go. We got the smart economy with all those different industries, and now how can we drive towards a more sustainable and equitable planet? So coming back to those industries, I've had other videos in the past where I kind of talk about Kate Bosworth's awesome sort of circle, and the idea is to get everybody on the circle. If you're out here, if you're polluting the air, you're overshooting, you need to be pulled onto it. If you're falling short, if you don't have housing or food, you need to be lifted up. So using these lattices, tiling them into these different industries, we can sort of bring to bear new kinds of corporations corresponding to these ideas of avatars, like an air pollution avatar or a food avatar. And those would have addresses that could then connect and speak as a collective of people interested in clean water relative to these industries and their activities, which are progressively modeled in public domain models. So we take all these industries, we let them do their thing and all their decisions, and then we take those and we model them into some kind of public database. And this is going to be really important. It's basically, and I'm using Chinese characters here because visually they're very appealing, but this sort of atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, lithosphere, anthrosphere, and then this sort of idea of the holosphere, these need to be mapped. Like, you can take the total amount of land available on the planet, and we can sort of, you need to quantify that and attestate it in order to start working out land utilization from a biodiversity versus food production perspectives. So we're going to need to quantify that. But there you saw the equity. Here the sustainability. Again, each one of these would have an address where, going back to someone who wants world peace, if they want world peace, they would find, if I go back, they would find that, where is it? They would find reference to that peace node where anybody interested in this would find each other, have a common point. We could see what proportion of the population really wants that, and then we could better coordinate towards those objectives. And then on the sustainable planet, we would get better accounting on all these things. There you go. You see, you can superposition these, so you get the sense of both of those, and then add your industry avatars, and you've got your holographic digital model of the planet and everything in it, which lets you progressively steer and direct different purposes to shared common ends. And I'm going to wrap up here. You sort of press that down. It's all going to fit on the phone with handles, and you end up with your smartphone connecting to a smart planet, and you have these equity, industry, ecologies, and in fact more. You could have any group can create their own avatar, and they're going to be incentivized to work together for common causes. And that will give you this idea of smart money. You can embed programming in the money itself, as well as consensus. You can, I haven't talked about it, but consensus is all through this idea of voting and deduping of propositions and unifying them. And then finally, the sort of distributed identifier, the abstraction layer of this should let distributed identifiers do their magic relative to a lot of these objectives. And that's it. Thanks for your attention.